In her book, The Human Condition, Hannah Arendt points out that the origin of forgiveness in the realm of human affairs lies with Jesus, for whom forgiveness is a human power, an earthbound act between people, on the basis of which God likewise will bestow his own forgiveness on the one who has forgiven others. This may be an odd place to open a paper on queer forgiveness, specifically in relation to the public apology made by the Toronto Police Department in June 2016 for the raiding of bathhouses in the late 1970s and 1980s. However, I cite Arendt here not only because, as she and Jacques Derrida and others have affirmed, apology and forgiveness always bears some relation to this religious heritage, whether Abrahamic, Christian, or Islamic. But because I want to draw on the very terms inherited from the gospel. To recall, in Matthew 6:14-15, we read, "If you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." It is this language of trespass that I want to focus on, given its resonance with the promiscuous and itinerant movement of queer sexual spatial ethos, an example of which is cruising. For cruising is not only a clandestine form of trespass, dedicated to pleasure and the intimacy that strangers can have in public. It also operates internally, if you will, through an economy of trespass and forgiveness. As in the scene in which, no matter how many times you pass by me, trespass against me, if at some point you retrace your steps and this time come over to me, I will forgive your previous trespasses. It's all the more striking that this is essentially a rephrasing of the Gospel of Luke 17:3-4, which in part reads, "And if he trespass against you and turn again to you, saying, I changed my mind, you shall release," that is, forgive him. Maybe.
I like it.
Right. like the hookup in cruising, forgiveness derives its power and effect from being entirely unpredictable and unexpected. In this way, forgiving is similar to promising, in that both involve a lack of mastery, control, and security over the essential uncertainty of the future and what might come to pass. Forgiving and promising interrupt ordinary historical temporality, and both are sustained by being without determined finality. Their time is the time of passing, opening up a space that is less a place than a passage, where there is a rapport with coming and going, something like a cruising ground. It is in this way that as a receptivity, an affectability, a passability, we might say a trespassability, by which sense passes between, amongst, and around. It is in these ways that cruising is an ethos. The question of the ethical and of ethics arises when this ethos of trespass is trespassed against. That is, when passing becomes trespassing, now inscribed within the legal juridical meaning of a misdeed or crime. When the police infiltrate a cruising ground in order to entrap and impose citations, as the Toronto Police Department did just months after issuing its official public apology for the bathhouse raids of 30 years earlier, they not only ensnare individuals, they also destroy an ethos. For when it comes to this policing of sex, an ethics of apology would need to answer to, by measuring itself against, the ethos of queer erotic passing and trespassing. In other words, to forms of forgiveness that are heterogeneous to juridical, political, judicial, and penal orders. If we understand apology to sit somewhere between law and the extrajudicial, then forgiveness sits somewhere between the extrajudicial and justice, where in both cases the extrajudicial stands here for judgment. Apology, while more closely tied to misdeeds than to crimes, nonetheless circulates within the orbit of penal law in the sense that, as Arendt argued, the forgivable is that which can be punished. So forgiveness and punishment are not opposites for Arendt, but instead are two attempts to, in her words, quote, put an end to something that without interference would go on endlessly. Yet this is exactly what pulls forgiveness back into the realm of legal juridical meaning. In other words, the forgivable and its relation to finality. Yet, as I already suggested, and as Derrida opens his interview/essay titled On Forgiveness, in principle, there is no limit to forgiveness, he writes, no measure, no moderation, no to what point. In other words, forgiveness is in excess of every measure of forgiveness, and hence it stands in an immeasurable relation to apology, especially an apology for the destruction of forms of relation and ways of being together that exist without proper measure, in their shared sustaining of the sense of separation and departure, by which ethos and the ethical themselves remain possible. Forgiving the police apology for its trespass must remain an impossibility. It must remain unforgivable, or if you wish, without finality, lest our trespasses be forgiven in turn. That notion, for what they know not what they did, that is that, in other words, going astray, is what traditional apology and forgiveness respond to. However, here, as I have argued, such going astray, trespassing is queer, sexual, social ethos. Thus, it must remain unforgivable to any apology, if it is to go on passing endlessly, one hopes, as before, as the very ground or rapport of being with, separation, and departure, which is to say, in its infinitely orgasmic sense. Counter to Arendt, who argued that, quote, the power engendered when people gather together and act in concert disappears the moment they depart, part of the sovereign power of queer erotic ethos is derived precisely from what I call the faculty of departure, an art of living as art of leaving. It is this that renders ethos, queer or otherwise, an ethics beyond ethics, that is, following Derrida, quote, perhaps the undiscoverable place of forgiveness. This is the sense of forgiveness exempt from meaning, from normality, from finality. It is what renders forgiveness mad. Such radical, mad, queer forgiveness renders inoperative, not apology per se, but any ethics upon which it might be based, including what we're calling an ethics of apology. Thank you.